Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarech, we are continuing with Perek Chamishi in the Rambam's Hilchos Torah, the 5th chapter in the Rambam's Laws of Torah study, in his Sefer Mada, his book of knowledge. In today's Perek, we're going to discuss primarily two things. Number one, the honor given to a Torah sage, and the honor that a sage has to give to his student. Now, before we begin, there's one note of preface. In the first 9 halachas of this chapter, up until halacha test, we are speaking primarily about somebody's Rebbe Muvhak, which literally means a teacher that taught his student majority of his Torah knowledge. Now, any other Talmud Chacham is called a Talmud Chaver, that is somebody who is your colleague and you are a student of. And those people, while they require respect, they are not going to demand the same level of respect that you would have to afford to a Rebbe Muvhak, which we will see shortly even supersedes the honor that you give to your father. And Rebbe Hashem will delve into the specifics in the coming chapter. Halacha Aleph, the Rambam begins, Kishem she'adam mitzvah b'chved aviv u'v'irasei, the same way a person is required to honor and fear his father, kach hu chayav b'chved rabbi u'v'irasei. Similarly, he's required to fear and honor his teacher, the rabbi yasem me'aviv, and not only that, but his teacher comes before his father, she'aviv hevi'u l'chai ha'olam hazeh, because the father brought this guy into this physical world. But this teacher that's going to teach him the Chachma of Torah, he's giving him life in the world to come. So let's say, for example, you see the lost object of your father and of your teacher. So first you have to return the object belonging to your teacher, and then you could go back and return the object belonging to your father. You see both of them that are burdened under a load, maniach as shal rabbi va'achakach shal aviv. So you should help your teacher first with his load, and then you should go to your father. Aviv rabbi shvuyim bashivya. Now let's say both your father and your teacher are captives. Poida as rabbi va'achakach poida as aviv. So therefore you should redeem your teacher, and then subsequently you should redeem your father. V'im haya aviv talmud chachamim. Now, let's say your father was a talmud chacham. Even if he wasn't as great of a Talmud Chacham as your teacher, but he had some sort of Chachma, so then, so then in that instance, you would redeem your father first and then return to your teacher. Also, if your father is a Talmud Chacham, even not to the level as your teacher, so then you should return your father's lost object and then return your teacher's lost object. Your greatest level of honor and fear should be that of your teacher, which our sages taught, that you should fear your teacher like you fear heaven, and specifically because the teacher is giving over that heavenly teachings. So therefore, it's one of the same, and just like you would fear God to the highest level, so you should fear your teacher, who is your conduit for that godliness, to the highest level. Therefore, they said, anybody who disputes your teacher's authority, it's like you're disputing the authority of the godly presence. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, al Hashem, you are revolting against God. This is talking about the rebellion of Kairach, and even though Kairach's rebellion was against Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah teaches us that no, it was against Hashem himself. And anybody who creates a controversy with his teacher, it's like he created a controversy with the godly presence. Shenamar, the pasuk says, Asher Ravu Bnei Yisrael Es Hashem, that the Bnei Yisrael contested God. This is speaking about Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar with the water. V'chol hamis ra'im al rabbi, and anybody who complains against their teacher, kamis ra'im al hashchina, it's like they're complaining against the heavenly presence. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Loi aleinu silunoi seichem ki al Hashem. It's not on us that your complaints are directed, but rather towards God. Anybody who criticizes his teacher, it's like somebody who criticizes the godly presence. The pasuk says that the nation of Israel spoke out against Moshe and Hashem, and even though this dispute, when it happened, was just between Bnei Yisrael and Moshe, the pasuk alludes that to a disagreement with God. Halacha Beis, the Rambam defines these type of disagreements. What's this disagreement, somebody who disputes his teacher, this is, let's say somebody establishes a study hall and he gives over teachings and he starts to pasken halacha without asking permission from his primary teacher at a time when his teacher is still living. And even if your teacher lives in a completely different country, you still can't give over teachings and psak without asking permission first. And furthermore, a person is never allowed to give over teachings in front of his teacher. And anybody who does so gives over a teaching of halacha in front of his primary teacher. It's like he's obligated in death. And this comes from the Gemara in Eruvin that says that this was the reason that Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron HaKohen, they were killed, was because of this transgression. Halacha Gimel, once we said that a person is not allowed to give over teachings in front of his master, we need to define what that means. If there's a distance of 12 mil between him and his teacher, what's 12 mil? So a mil is 2,000 amas. An amas is usually around 1.5 feet. So that equals about 1 kilometer. So there needs to be a space of 12 kilometers around 12 mil between him and his teacher. And in that instance, if somebody goes and asks him a question based on halacha, so then he could respond. Now the Rambam says, the only time that you could actually answer a question, even if it's in front of your teacher, is if you're preventing somebody from doing a transgression. What does that mean? Ketzad, give me an example. Let's say somebody goes and he's doing a transgression, he's doing something that's wrong. Let's say he's either a wicked person or he doesn't even know that he's doing something wrong. He just, he's going on his day, he thinks that he doesn't remember that it's Shabbos and he starts to do something. You need to go and tell him, what you're doing is a transgression, it's not allowed. And even if your Rebbe is standing right there, you could still go and say that, even though the teacher didn't give you direct permission to do so, but you're still allowed. Why? Anytime there's a possibility for the desecration of God's name, so therefore you do not give deference to that of your teacher. Why is that? Because since the deference of your teacher is only due to the fact that there's deference of God, it's directly connected. So therefore, if there was a desecration of God, that supersedes even the respect that you're supposed to give to his teacher. Now, we started off this halacha saying that if there's a distance of 12 mil between a person and his teacher, he could answer a shaila, a question that has to do with halacha. The Rambam is now going to qualify that statement. What were we discussing when we said that law? Something that comes up from time to time, just like a question on the way you're walking and somebody says, hey, by the way, I have this shaila. Let's say you set up an established zone where you're going to answer questions and you're going to give over shir, etc. Even if you're on two opposite sides of the globe, meaning it doesn't matter how much distance is in between you and your Rebbe, you're never able to give over this type of teachings and psak unless A, your teacher passes away, or B, you get explicit permission from your teacher that you could go ahead and give over these teachings. And I don't think that just because a person's teacher passed away that now all the students could go and they could start answering shilas and giving over classes and shiurim. The only people that are allowed to do this are people that are fitting to give over these teachings. They are able to give over these teachings once their teacher passes away. Halacha Daled, the Rambam now speaks about these people who are unfit for teaching. Any student who is unfitting to give over this type of teaching and psak, and he decides to do it anyway, this person is a fool, evil, and he's extremely haughty. And with regard to him, the pasuk says, Ki rabim chalalim hifila, that many corpses you cast down upon them. And so too, conversely, any student who is fitting to give over these type of teachings and refrains from doing so, he holds back the spreading of Torah, and it's like he places stumbling blocks in front of blind people, which obviously isn't meant to be taken literally, but it means that he creates unnecessary hardships for people who want to learn Torah. Va'alav nemar, and with regard to this person, the pasuk says, V'ha'atzumim kol harugeha, you killed many people. Now, atzumim also means closed eyes, meaning that because you closed your eyes and didn't teach the Torah, you ended up with a lot of death, so to speak. Now, returning back to those who are unfit for learning Torah, there are these small students who didn't learn in the proper way. Now they want to show off to the people who are unwise, and they want to act like they're so smart and that they could paskin, and so they sit at the front of these batei din, even though they're not qualified to do so. Haim hamarabim es hamachlokes, and these are the same people that cause unnecessary arguments in Bnei Yisrael. V'heim hamach rivim es ha'olam, and they destroy the world. V'hamak biim neira shel Torah, and they extinguish the fire of Torah. V'hamechablim kerem Hashem tzavos, and they wreak havoc in the, so to speak, vineyard of Hashem. V'aleihem amar shleimah bechachmasei, and this is what Solomon said in his great wisdom. Echsu lanu shu'alim ktanim mechablim keramim uchramenu smadar. You should get us these small foxes, these foxes that destroy the vineyard, and our vineyard is blooming. Halacha hey, the Rambam returns to the honor afforded to a Talmud Chacham and one's primary Rebbe, Asalei l'salmid likreis Rabbi b'shmai. A disciple is not able to call his teacher by his name, va'afilu shalei b'fanav, even when he's not in front of him. V'layazkir shmai b'fanav, va'afilu likreis la'acherim sheshmam kishem rabbi. He shouldn't even call somebody else who has the same name as his teacher that name, kederech sha'isa b'shem aviv, just like you would do with someone's father. Ella yishan shmam. Rather, you should change your friend's name. So let's say your father's name is Chanoich, and you have a friend named Chanoich. Instead of calling your friend Chanoich, you should call him maybe by his last name or a nickname, etc. Even after your teacher dies, you should still keep with this practice. Now, this is only if your teacher or your father also has an unusual name, so that when you say his name, everybody's going to be aware that you're speaking about someone like your father. The implications is that if your father or Rebbe's name was Avram or Yitzchak or Yaakov, a name that is very prevalent, so then the same obligation to change your friend's name would not be there, and the only time you would be restricted from saying his name would be in front of your teacher. You shouldn't give greetings to your teacher in the same way that you would greet a friend. Rather, you should bow to this person and respond in a very fearful way with much honor. Say, Shalom Alecha Rabbi, peace be on you, my master. And if your teacher gives you Shalom first, you should respond to him again with this type of fear. Shalom Alecha Rabbi Umari, peace be upon you, my master and my teacher. Halacha Vav, the Rambam continues, you shouldn't take off your tefillin in front of your teacher. Neither should you recline and lean back. Rather, you should sit the way that you would sit before a king. Now, you should never daven in front of your teacher so that your back is facing the teacher, which is a sign of haughtiness and disrespect. Nor should you stand behind the teacher, or right on his side, which indicates that you're at the same level as your teacher. Neither should you walk with your primary Rebbe directly next to one another as if you guys are friends on the same level. Rather, you should distance yourself a little bit from the teacher. Neither should you be directly behind him. Rather, you should be a little bit to the side and a little bit back, and that's where you should daven. And you should not enter the bathhouse with your teacher. And this is taking for granted the fact that your teacher doesn't need help, and therefore seeing him naked would be a sign that you two are on the same level. But of course, if the Rebbe needs help, it would be a great kavod for you to accompany him and help him in the bathhouse. You should never sit in the Rebbe's place. You should never disagree with the things he says in front of him. You should never contradict his statements. You shouldn't sit in front of him until he directs you to sit. Neither should you stand from when you were sitting next to him until he says stand, or until he gives you permission that you could stand. And when you depart from your teacher, you should never walk with your back towards him. Rather, you should walk backwards, departing from him face to face. Halacha Zayin, the Rambam is going to speak about standing for your teacher. You need to stand for your teacher. The moment you see him in your eyesight, even from a far distance, She is kasim imenu v'lo yireh kamoisai, until he leaves your eyesight and you can no longer see him. V'achar kach yeshiv, and then you could go back to sitting. V'chayiv adam lahakbil es pnei rabbi beregel, and you need to visit your primary teacher on the Shalosh Regalim, the Jewish holidays. And again, we're just going to stress that this is only with regard to your primary teacher, and we will see the laws of standing for a Stam Talmid Chacham in Halacha Tes. Halacha Ches, ein cholkin kavid letalmid b'fnei harav, never give honor to one's student in front of that student's teacher, ela im kein haya derech rabbi lechalik lekavid, unless the teacher gives honor to that student directly. V'chol melaches shel eved oisel rabbi, any menial jobs that a servant would do for his master, Talmud oisel rabbi, so the student should do those tasks for his teacher. V'im haya b'makim she'ein makirin oisay v'lo hayu like tefillin. Now there's one exception to this rule. If you're in a place where people don't know you and you aren't wearing tefillin, back in the day, they used to wear tefillin all day long. If you're not wearing tefillin, v'chosh shama yomru, and now you're nervous that the people might see you doing these tasks to your teacher, and they might say, evedhu, that he's a servant, because servants are not obligated in time-bound mitzvahs like women, and therefore they don't wear tefillin. And since you're doing these tasks and you're not wearing tefillin, so people might make the false assumption that you are a servant. So in that case, so then you shouldn't do tasks like putting on his shoes, etc., which you might be mistaken to be a servant. Any teacher that says to his student, no, don't do these things for me. Please do not do these things. He's actually doing his student a disservice. He's removing kindness from him, and he's removing the yoke of heaven from his student. Why is this? We said in Hilchos that Avodas Hashem is an all-encompassing act. It's not limited to just study, etc., but it's how you live your daily life. So here, when you're robbing your student of the opportunity to do good things for a great Torah scholar, you're opening an opportunity for his expression in those regards to be limited, and therefore it might affect the way that he serves God. V'chol Talmud shemizalzel b'davar mikol kavid rabbi good and l'shchina sheyistalek misra. Any person who unfortunately treats the teacher in a negative way or does not afford his teacher the correct respect causes the divine presence to cease from Yisrael. Halacha Tes, Ra'a es rabbi over al divrei Torah. Let's say you see that your master is transgressing something from the Torah. You should say to him, Lo matanu rabbeinu kach v'kach. Didn't our teacher and our master, aka you, teach us this and this thing? V'chol zman shemazker shmua b'fanav. And any time you remember something that he taught in the past in front of the Rebbe, you should say, kach limatanu rabbeinu. Such and such is what our master taught us. And additionally, if you're saying the teaching of someone else, meaning not your primary teacher, in front of your teacher, you should never say it without quoting the source, even though we have a general principle that you should always quote teachings in the name of the person that said it. There is an added level of stringency here, because since if you say a teaching with no teacher attributed, people might assume that it came from your primary teacher, and in this instance, it actually did not come from your primary teacher, and therefore you need to specify who it came from so people will not err and think that it came from that teacher. And when your master teacher dies, you have to rip all your clothes until your heart is revealed, and you should never mend those clothes. Now the Rambam is going to qualify all the previous halachas with what we mentioned in the beginning of the chapter, that is with your Rebbe Muvhak, which means he taught you the majority of your Torah knowledge. But if you didn't learn most of your knowledge from him, so then you're considered a Talmud Chaver, like a colleague and a student. And you don't need to afford him the same respect that we mentioned in the previous halachas, but you should still stand for this person. But if you remember, we said that you should stand for your Rebbe Muvhak the moment he enters your eyesight. Well, for a Stam Talmid Chacham, you just need to stand when he enters your Dalet Amis, your 4 cubits in every direction. And you should rip your clothes in a way that you would rip your clothes for any person that you would mourn, unlike this special type of mourning that we mentioned before, where you reveal your heart. And even if this person only taught you one small thing, so forget about teaching you majority of your knowledge. He didn't even teach you a lot of your knowledge, he just taught you one little thing from Torah. Still, you should stand for him and you should rip your clothing for him. Halach Yod, the Rambam continues to speak about general Talmidei Chachamim, B'chol Talmid Chachamim, Shedei Oisav, Mechuvanos, any wise sage who has the proper intentions, he should never speak in front of somebody else who's wiser and more knowledgeable than he is, even if he learned nothing from that person. The fact that he's a greater sage than he is means that he should not talk in front of him. Halach Yud Aleph, the Rambam now returns to a Rabbi Muvhak, if a primary teacher wants to waive his honor to his student in any of the things that we discussed previously, or in one respect, he says, please don't do X, Y, or Z for me. If he wants to waive these honors just for one specific student or for all of his students, he has the ability to waive his honor at his own discretion. And even if he does waive this honor, even so, the student needs to afford him respect. Even at the time when he waived his honor, the student still needs to respect him. Halach Yud Beis, the Rambam is now going to speak about honor and respect for a student. Just like the student needs to respect the teacher, so too the teacher needs to honor his students and encourage them. And this is what our sages taught when they said, you should honor the honor of your students more than your own honor. And a person needs to be very careful with his students, and he needs to love them, because they're going to be the children who give him pleasure in this world, meaning through their questions and their responses in shir, they cause him to think more deeply about Torah and get much enjoyment in this world, and they bring him enjoyment in the next world. Halach Yud Gimel, the Rambam says not only that, but hatalmidim meisifin chachmas harav umarchivin libay, but the students directly add to the knowledge of the teacher, and they open up his heart, so to speak, to more horizons. And this is what our sages taught when they said, Harbe chachma lamati, I learned a lot of wisdom. And I learned more wisdom from my friends than from my own teachers. And I learned more from my students than everyone. And the same way you light a big fire by first lighting one stick and using that stick to light the big fire, so too a small, simple student, he jolts the teacher until his little question that he asked in the realm of shir caused a massive spark of wisdom to come from the teacher. The students go and they ask questions, and those questions are directly related to the understanding of the teacher, and the teacher masters the subject material by being able to answer the student's question. And therefore, not only do you have to love them because they're your children, and they bring you a lot of honor and enjoyment, but also because they are directly responsible for your own understanding of the subject matter.